I have counted a lot of things in my life. Beaver pelts, winters, the days a man can go without speaking to another living soul before he starts talking to his mule and meaning it. But I never once thought to count kindness, because up in those mountains, kindness was the one thing nobody had extra of. So when a woman I had come to cheat handed me something worth more than every fur strapped to my saddle, and asked for nothing back, I did what any hard, frightened man does when the ground shifts under him. I tried to pay her, and she wouldn't let me. This is the story of 10 furs, 1 widow, and the trade that ruined every cold ledger I ever kept. Stay with me, because the part that changed everything didn't happen where I thought it would. The snow came sideways the morning. I decided to rob a grieving woman without ever raising a hand. I want to be honest about that from the start, because if I dress it up you'll like me too much, and I don't deserve it yet. I rode down out of the high timber with 10 prime marten furs rolled tight behind my saddle, and my plan was simple as a knife. Trade them to the widow up at the last cabin before the pass, get her flour and salt and lead, and lie to her about the count. 10 furs, I'd tell her 8. That was the whole scheme. Small, ugly. The kind of small ugliness a man does when the mountain has taken enough from him that he figures the world owes him a little back, and he intends to collect it 2 furs at a time from whoever's too tired to argue. My name doesn't matter much up there. Down in the valley towns they called me Kettle, on account of I ran hot and made noise before I boiled over. Up in the peaks they didn't call me anything, because there was no one to do the calling. I keep a ledger, have since I was a boy, little water-swollen book, pages soft as chamois now, and in it I write every fur I take and every fur I trade, 1 line each in a cramped hand. My father laughed at me for it once. Said a trapper who counts his catch out loud invites the wolves to count it too. I never counted out loud after that, but I never stopped writing it down either. There's a difference between a superstition and a habit. The difference is you're allowed to keep the habit. The widow's cabin sat where the trees gave up. You could see it from the ridge. A low box of gray logs, smoke leaning off the chimney like it too was tired of standing straight. Her husband had built it. I knew that much. Everybody who moved furs through the pass knew Isham Cole the way you know a landmark. You don't have feelings about a mountain, you just navigate by it. He'd frozen the winter before, caught out in a whiteout not 2 miles from his own door. They found him in the spring facing home. That detail stuck to people, facing home, like the direction was some comfort. I hadn't thought about her much. The widow. In my head she was just the new keeper of Isham's stores, and stores were stores. The dog announced me before the door did. It came off the porch stiff-legged and low, an old brown thing with a white face and 1 milk-blind eye, and it didn't bark so much as groan, a long broken sound like a gate that had forgotten how to swing. I stopped my mule. In that country, you let the dog decide how much of a welcome you're getting. The door opened. A woman stood in it with a rifle held not quite up, not quite down, in the easy grip of somebody who has decided she'll raise it if she has to and would rather not. That's far enough till I know your business, she said. Furs, I said, and I patted the roll behind me so she could see the shape of it. Come to trade. Heard the coal place keeps stores through the pass. Something moved across her face at the name. Not grief exactly. Grief settles. This was sharper, the flinch of a name said too casual by a stranger. She lowered the rifle the rest of the way. Kept, she said. It kept stores. Man who ran it is dead. A beat. Get down then, tie off. Sarah'll not bite you unless I tell her the story of you first. The dog's name was Sarah. I don't know why that undid me a little, but it did. Inside, the cabin was warmer than it had any right to be and cleaner than any place a man keeps alone. There was a rag rug worn to threads, a table sanded pale, and on the wall, on a peg, a man's coat big through the shoulders, oiled canvas gone stiff. She'd left it hanging. A year, and she'd left it on the peg where he'd put it, and I understood then that this was not a woman who had finished with anything. She was living inside an unfinished sentence. Her name was Rue Cole. She said it plain, no ceremony, the way you'd give a stranger the name of a road. I set my furs on the table, and here is where the ugliness was meant to happen. I unrolled them slow, and as I laid them out I let two hang back, half-ducked in the roll, and I said, 8 Martin. Prime. Winter coats, all of them, no rub, no rot. You can see the count. 8 where there were 10. She came to the table, and she did not look at the furs first. She looked at me. Long. The way a woman looks at weather she isn't sure of. And then she looked down and she ran her hand over the top pelt, and I swear she wasn't feeling the fur, she was feeling something in it, some old grammar, and when she spoke her voice had changed. Isham took Martin out of the north draw, she said. This time of year. He'd bring them down and lay them on this table just so, and I'd tell him he'd never make a trader because he petted his catch like they were still alive. Her thumb moved through the guard hairs. You lay them out the same way he did. I didn't say anything. There wasn't a lie I could put next to that. 8, she said, and now she looked up at me and her eyes went deliberate, unhurried, to the roll behind my saddle talk, to the shape of it still on the table, to the 2 I'd tucked back. She'd counted. Of course she'd counted. A woman who runs stores in a starving country can count furs in her sleep. She knew. She knew, and she let it sit there in the warm room between us. And I felt my face go hot the way it does kettle, running hot, and I braced for the rifle, or the door, or the word thief, which is a word that follows a man down a mountain and into every town below it. She said, I'll give you flour, salt, lead, and a side of smoked meat for the 8. That was more than fair, that was generous. For 8 furs in that country, that was a summer's grace. And then she did the thing I have never in my life been able to set straight in the ledger. She went to the shelf by the fire and she took down a small parcel wrapped in soft hide and tied with sinew, and she set it on top of my furs. It was light. Whatever it was, it weighed nothing. And this, she said, for you, no trade. I looked at it like it might be alive. For what? For nothing, she said. That's the whole point of a gift. You've forgotten that up there, I expect. Men do. She wiped her hands on her apron. Isham forgot it too at the end, started counting everything, even me. She said this without cruelty toward the dead, just true, take it or leave it, but if you take it knowing I'm not owed a thing. I stood there with the ledger of my whole hard life open in my chest, and no line in it for this. Ma'am, I said, I gave you 8, there's 10. I don't know why I said it. It came up out of me like water out of rock. I'd never confessed a short count in my life. I'd built a life on the 2 furs a man doesn't see. And here I was handing it back for the price of nothing at all, because she'd handed me nothing at all first, and somehow her nothing had made my something unbearable to hold. She didn't gloat, she didn't even look surprised. She just nodded, slow, like a woman watching a fever break. I know, she said, bring them in out of the cold. I stayed the night. Not by any invitation you could name. The dark came down and the snow with it, and only a fool rides a pass in a whiteout, and I had recent, sharp reasons to know what the pass did to men in whiteouts. She fed me. Elk stew, dark and salted, and bread that had gone a day past soft but tasted like a memory of my mother's, and I ate like the animal the mountain had made of me and was ashamed and ate anyway. Sarah the dog put her white face on my boot under the table and left it there, heavy, and I did not move my foot the whole meal for fear of losing the weight of her. We didn't talk much. She wasn't a woman who talked to fill a room. She'd learned to be alone, and it had left a quiet in her that wasn't empty, just full of things she wasn't going to hand a stranger. But late, with the fire down to a red mutter, she told me one thing. He didn't die lost, she said, out of nowhere into the coals. People say it's soft, like it's a mercy he must have got turned around. He didn't. Isham knew that ground blind. He died because he went back out for a man he didn't know. Fell had come through half froze, and Isham gave him the bed and the fire and then noticed the man's boy wasn't with him. Boy'd fallen behind on the trail. Isham went out after a child that wasn't his. She turned the poker in the coals. Found the boy. Send him ahead with a lantern and his own coat. That's the coat that came home, on the child. Her jaw worked. So he didn't die lost. He died counting somebody else's boy as worth more than his own warm bed, which is worse and better, and I have not decided in a year which. The coat on the peg, not Isham's coat. The boy's father's coat, brought back by a man who owed nothing to a child he'd never see grow. I looked at that oiled canvas on the wall, and I thought about my 10 furs and my clever 8, and I have never felt so small in a warm room in all my life. That parcel I gave you, Rue said, standing, done with the fire and done with me for the night. Don't open it here. Open it when you're up top again and you think there's nothing left worth carrying down. You'll know the day. She banked the fire. She took her rifle to the far side of the room where a curtain hung, and behind it there was a bed I did not look at, and Sarah followed her, and I lay down on the rag rug by the coals with a stranger's roof over me for the first time in 3 years. I did not sleep for a long while. I lay there, and I did the only thing I have ever known how to do with a night I can't understand. I took out the ledger. I wet the pencil, and by the last of the firelight I wrote the truest line I ever put in it. 10 furs in, traded 8, gave back 2, received. And I couldn't finish it. There was no word in my vocabulary of catch and count for what I'd received. The line just stopped, open, waiting like a coat left on a peg. I closed the book on the unfinished line, and I let it stay unfinished. Outside, the pass howled, and somewhere in it, if you believed the widow, a man had once walked out into that howl for a child not his own, and never once thought to count what it cost him. I told myself I'd figure the line in the morning. I never did figure it the way I meant to. She told me not to open it until I thought there was nothing left worth carrying down the mountain. I thought she was being kind, a widow's soft riddle to send a hard man off feeling better than he'd earned. I was wrong about the kindness the way I'd been wrong about everything else that winter. Because when the day finally came, and it came the way the worst days do, without asking, and I tore that little hide parcel open with shaking, half-dead hands, what was inside didn't comfort me. It saved my life, and then it did something worse than that. It made me go back. I left the coal place at first light with the sky scrubbed clean and the world blinding white, the way it goes after a storm has spent itself. Rue stood in the door with the rifle nowhere in sight now and Sarah leaning against her leg, and she didn't wave. She just watched me to the tree line the way you'd watch weather move off, glad it's going, half sorry too. I went back up into the high timber to finish out the season. That's the part I don't like telling, because it makes me sound like a man who learned nothing. She'd cracked me open at that table, and then I climbed right back up to the cold and the counting like a dog to its chain. But a man doesn't turn his whole self over in one warm night. It doesn't work that way, no matter what the stories down in the valley say. You get cracked, and then you carry the crack around a while, and the change comes in later through the crack like snowmelt, slow, when you're not watching. I carried her parcel in my coat, over my heart, and I didn't open it. The season turned mean. February in those mountains is a living thing with a grudge. The martin went scarce and then gone, driven down or holed up, and my lines came up empty morning after morning until the empty was its own kind of company. My stores ran low despite her flour and salt. The elk moved off. My mule took a stone bruise and went lame, and I nursed it and lost days, and days up there are the only currency that matters. You spend them on staying alive and there's never enough. And then the cough came. I'd like to tell you it came slow so I could have been smart about it. It didn't. One night I was tired and the next I was on fire, and the night after that I was so cold that the fire I built didn't reach me, and I understood with a flat animal clarity that I was doing the thing Isham Cole had done. I was becoming a story people tell soft. He must have got turned around. I lay in my lean-to 3 days, or 4. The ledger's honest that I lost the count, and losing the count frightened me worse than the fever did. A man who can't count his days has already started to leave them. On the worst night, I got it into my broken head that I would die there, and that no one would find me facing anything at all. And I thought, there's nothing left worth carrying down. And her voice came up out of the fever. Open it when you think there's nothing left worth carrying down. You'll know the day. I knew the day. My hands didn't want to work. I got the parcel out of my coat and my fingers had gone stupid with cold, and I couldn't manage the sinew knot. So I put the whole thing in my mouth like a wolf and worried it open with my teeth, and it fell into my lap in the fire's last red light. It wasn't food. Some starving part of me had hoped, God forgive it. It was a fire steel, a striker worn smooth from a big hand and a good flint, and a twist of charcloth kept dry in oiled hide. And there was a fold of paper, and on the paper in a plain, careful hand, 3 lines. This was Isham's. He never went out without it. He'd want it out here, not on my shelf grieving. Keep your fire, stranger. Keep counting mornings. I want to tell you what that fire steel was worth, and I can't, because I don't have the arithmetic. Mine had cracked 2 days before, and I'd been nursing coals like a sick child, terrified of the moment they'd die. That's what the fever was winning against, not just my body, my fire. And she'd sent me, weeks before either of us could have known, the one dead man's tool that would keep me burning through the worst of it. She couldn't have known. That's the thing I turned over and over. She'd handed me that parcel as a gift. No trade, no seeing ahead, just a widow giving away her husband's fire steel to a thief she'd caught at her own table, because she'd rather it be out in the world keeping a stranger alive than up on her shelf keeping her company in her grief. I struck that steel 100 times that night with shaking hands, and I got my fire back. And I lived on account of a man I never met, and a woman who owed me nothing but a boot out the door. I lay in the light of Isham Cole's fire, and I did the arithmetic at last. Not of furs, of the whole crooked account of my life. All the 2 furs tucked back, all the 8s I'd called out over 10s, all the men and women I'd shaved and shorted and figured I was owed against, and I saw the ledger of it stretch back through the years, every clever little theft, and the total at the bottom was a man dying alone in a linta who had to be given a reason to keep counting mornings by the widow of a saint. When the fever broke, I didn't finish the season. I broke camp. I loaded what furs I had, an honest, meager count, and I'll tell you it now. 9. 9 furs all winter I'd taken, and I wrote 9 and I meant 9. I took my lame mule slow down out of the high timber, and I did not go toward the valley towns and the traders and the money. I went to the last cabin before the pass. The smoke was leaning off the chimney same as before. Sarah came off the porch stiff-legged, groaning her broken gait groan, and then, I'll not forget it, she stopped. She put her white blind face up into the wind, and she knew me, and the groan turned into something else, a high creaking whine, and that old dog came the rest of the way at a limping run and put her whole weight against my legs like I was somebody worth arriving. Rue came to the door. No rifle. She looked at me a long moment, and at the mule, and at the 9 furs, and at my face, which the fever had carved down to something closer to honest than it had ever been. You opened it, she said, not a question. I did. And it kept my fire. My voice came out wrong. I was dying, it kept my fire. She closed her eyes just for a second, and when she opened them there was water standing in them that she didn't let fall, and she said, rough, good, that's good, he'd have, that's good. I got down. My legs barely held. I went to the table without asking, the way you go to a table you've been forgiven at, and I laid the 9 furs out slow, and I petted them flat the way Isham used to, the way I couldn't help doing any more, and I said, 9, Martin, 9, count them yourself, I'll not move till you have. She didn't count them. She looked at me counting them, and something eased in her face that had been holding tight for a year and more. I don't need furs, she said. I know it, that's why you're getting all 9. I pushed them across the pale wood. No trade, that's the whole point of a gift. You told me so. I'm a slow student, but I get there." She laughed, a startled, wet, cracked-open laugh, the first sound of real surprise I'd heard out of her, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth and shook her head, and Sarah barked once at the strange new noise of her woman laughing. I didn't stay a stranger after that. I'll not tell you it turned into more than it was, or tell you it stayed less. Some things aren't the ledger's business. I'll say only that I mended her fences that spring because the winter had thrown them down, and I found I was in no hurry to climb back to the high timber and the empty lines and the counting. I'll say the man's coat came down off the peg one day. She gave it to a family coming through the pass, a father and a small boy, and she did it dry-eyed and steady, and I understood she'd been waiting a year for a hand steady enough to give it with, and that somehow I'd become that hand. I'll say Sarah slept on my boot every night and I never once moved my foot. I still keep the ledger. Old habit. You're allowed the habit even when you've dropped the superstition. But there's a line in it I never finished, from a night by a stranger's fire, and I've left it open on purpose all this time. 10 furs in, traded 8, gave back 2, received. I know now there was never going to be a word to finish it. That was the lesson, though I was too hard and cold to take it the first night. Some things you receive can't be entered. They don't balance. They're not supposed to. You just carry them down the mountain and you keep your fire and you count your mornings. And when a stranger comes to your own table someday with a short count in his eyes and a hard winter in his hands, you set something on top of his furs. You tell him it's for nothing. And you watch to see if he's got the sense too.